Even as a kid, I found forests really comforting. I loved walking among the trees while listening to the sound of the wind whistling through the branches, or the gentle cacophony of birds and insects in a refreshing and exotic setting. I could spend several hours walking on the trails and losing myself in my thoughts. I would always find a good opportunity to get some fresh air and end my day wandering in the woods. In fact, that's why I invited my best friend at the time, Ben, to camp in a forest not far from his home. I didn't know that this would be the worst idea of all time, the one that would change my life forever. At 14, Ben and I weren't afraid of camping in the forest. Teenagers have this ability to ignore danger, to feel invincible, and we were no exception to this rule. We would visit several abandoned factories, do impromptu climbing in dilapidated houses, and we never had the idea to camp together. So when I proposed it to him, he was immediately thrilled. He had asked if we could tell each other little scary stories around the fire or try to summon the spirits of the forest. But I had another plan in mind. I wanted to try something funnier, scarier. That's how I finally suggested we play a game of night hide and seek. Ben immediately agreed, and even hurried to prepare his backpack. We hadn't officially decided when we would go camping yet, but apparently, for Ben, it was that night or never. Since we were both on school break, I knew convincing his parents wouldn't be too hard. For me and my host family, it was so simple that I forgot the details. All I remember is that I proceeded in the same way as my friend. I pretended to sleep at his place, while he told his parents he was sleeping at mine. In a very short time, we were finally ready to leave our comfort to play a night hide-and-seek in a dark and terrifying forest. The scenario dreamed of by all horror and thrill enthusiasts. Ben was so excited that he even borrowed his neighbor's tent, which was so spacious and easy to set up, that it made all its counterparts look like rags on a stick. Everything was absolutely perfect. Nothing could go wrong in our organization. Ben was so excited that he was pedaling like a madman, and I was having a hard time keeping up. But Mole was slowly starting to burn me out, and just as I was about to ask him to take a break, he braked in front of a wooden sign. I squinted, and quickly realized that there would be no need to stop to get back on the road, since we had arrived at the entrance to the forest. Ben entered without hesitation and hid his bike in the nearby underbrush. Once inside, he signaled for me to enter, but I recoiled. As I told you earlier, I was used to forests. I knew all the sensations that the fresh air of nature could provide me. All the animal melodies, changing with the seasons. But there, something was not right. Only a faint wind noise struggled to penetrate the dense leaves of the huge trees before me. The light had trouble getting through, and weak rays illuminated what looked like a muddy and slippery dirt path. The air was dry outside, but everything suggested that in this forest, even in the middle of summer, it was very humid. Apart from these feelings, there was another sentiment that was creeping into my mind. Something impossible to chase away, no matter how hard I tried to do it. A sense of danger. Ben, meanwhile, appeared indifferent, because the next moment, he flat out pulled my arm to force me in. According to him, night was about to fall and we needed to find a spot to set up our camp. Chills ran through my body when I took my first step on the damp ground of this forest. But I finally managed to shake off the sense of danger by convincing myself we were safe. That Ben's house was only a little over 5 minutes away by bike. There was no risk with hunting, as it was out of season. Everything was perfectly secure and nothing could predict any potential danger. So I ended up rationalizing as much as possible and replacing this feeling of danger with excitement, a desire for adventure. I began exploring the forest like a treasure hunter. We talked quite a bit along the way and wandered in search of a flat, clear, and less muddy area than the rest of the forest. Then after a few minutes, we finally found it. The area was clear, rather flat, but most importantly, the ground was not damp. We hurried to set up Ben's neighbor's very important person tent and gathered a few small stones to make the hearth for our future campfire. We also brought several drinks, crackers, and some sausages to cook over the fire. I even thought to bring a Goosebumps book in case the evening didn't go as planned, and that we needed a little shot of thrill. After that, we started searching for branches to light the fire. However, this was by far the most difficult part of the early evening. Most of them were soaked. We knew beforehand it would complicate our task. We found a few twigs, but nothing that could last us an entire evening. Ben then touched a tree and realized that many of them were dry, unlike the forest floor. He then grabbed a large branch from the one he was touching and ripped it off with a quick jerk. The next moment, something inexplicable happened. All the birds in the trees started flying simultaneously. It was as if the sky had darkened for a moment and a deathly silence reigned all around us. The ambient temperature changed drastically, going from a hot and humid air to something cold and dry. When I lifted my head to turn towards Ben, I saw him staring intensely at the branch he had just torn off. And I'm sure I heard him say something like a question to himself. He had said in a whisper, "What have I done?" I started to slowly approach him to make sure he was okay. Ben just stood there, motionless, staring at the branch he was holding, without saying a word. The forest seemed to get darker and darker as I approached him, and the more I moved forward, the more the feeling of danger resurfaced. The silence became so heavy that I felt like I was losing my balance. I heard Ben utter another sentence, still staring at the branch he held between his fingers, as if he was in some kind of psychotic delirium. And after a moment, he had softly said, "It's as if I had torn off his arm." It was at that moment that I came within his reach and touched his shoulder. I then told him that I didn't feel it and that we had to leave from here. He nodded his head and followed me without saying a single word. In fact, he was just walking, while staring at the emptiness in front of his eyes. I looked at the direction we had come from and decided to walk straight ahead of us. I had in mind to reach the entrance of the forest as quickly as possible. The sense of danger persisted. At that moment, all I wanted was to escape the forest as fast as I could. Ben seemed to need help, but the worst part of all this is that I too saw the forest getting darker and darker. And when I looked at my watch to see what time it was, I almost tripped to find myself in the foliage under my feet. It was 22:20 according to my watch. But that was impossible since we had entered the forest around 14 o'clock. It was impossible that 8 hours had passed between our arrival here and now. I stopped to catch my breath and asked Ben to tell me what was displayed on his. But he didn't answer me. A quick glance revealed his empty eyes. Without emotion, he still held that damn branch in his hand. I grabbed his wrist and checked the time myself. His showed 3 o'clock in the morning. I no longer understood what was happening, and I started to wonder if it was possible that we were lost. I took out my cell phone to check my location in order to find my way back. Our way as quickly as possible. But my battery was completely dead. I hurried to take Ben's, but when I looked at the screen I felt my heart skip a beat. Our phones, which had been pre-charged to 100%, were both empty and refused to turn on. Our watches seemed completely out of order, and it was even possible that we were lost. So I kept walking straight ahead, and that's how we came face to face with something unbelievable. In front of our eyes was our camp. I had no idea how this was possible, I was sure, absolutely certain, that I had walked straight ahead for several long minutes. More time than it took to reach the entrance of the forest. We didn't turn around once, and yet we came back to our camp. I gathered the scattered fallen branch remains around us, because this now confirmed what was obvious. We were definitely lost in this forest. Both our parents thought we were at each other's house, and so no one really knew where we were at the moment. We were lost, but no one knew it. I overcame the panic that was starting to overwhelm me, which was necessary to ensure our survival. Together, Ben had become a real tomb, and he still held that horrible branch in his hand. When I tried to take it from him earlier, he just held it firmly, without even looking at me. It was impossible for me to take it from him. I didn't know what this forest had done to Ben, but it was as if it had sucked out his soul after a moment of looking at it. I wondered how to get us out of there. I lit the fire. I used all the branches we had brought back, and as I had imagined, it had not been easy at all. The humidity of the last ones complicated the task. So, just like Ben previously, I got up and approached a tree that seemed drier than all the others. As darkness fell, I struggled to navigate the increasingly difficult path. Fortunately, the campfire was already lit, and it allowed me to see a bit clearer. In the forest, I grabbed one of the branches of the tree in front of me and pulled it. Before I even managed to tear it off, I heard a dull noise coming from behind me. The horrible sound I had just heard was a perfect mix between the noise of cracking wood and a human bone that would have been shattered against the ground. I turned around and saw Ben, who was pointing at the top of a tree in the darkness. I looked at the tree he pointed out and noticed it swaying gently from right to left. I then slowly moved closer to Ben, and just as I was about to ask him what had just happened, he said, "Look, it's hanging on the branch." With no certainty, I looked up towards the large branch where Ben's finger was pointing, and I saw the silhouette of something standing still, its head turned in our direction. If I had listened to myself, I would have run away as fast as possible, but I still had hope that what was in front of us at that moment was just some kind of animal. But looking in detail despite the darkness, I could make out its long fingers wrapped around the branch it was holding. One of its legs was hanging in the void, and a moonbeam allowed me to distinguish that its skin, pale and bluish, was covered with a dark and thick brownish crust. In places, I could not see its face. On the other hand, I could perfectly distinguish the glow of its eyes, shining in the dark, like animals. I was paralyzed with fear, and in a whisper, I managed to say, "Damn, Ben, what the hell is this mess?" I didn't expect him to answer me, but he did anyway, all while keeping his finger pointed at that thing. He gently turned his head towards me, and with his other hand, gave me the branch that he hadn't let go of until then. I woke him up because of that. Another crack was heard, and the thing in the tree had moved, and in an instant, and without me being able to distinguish the slightest of its movements, it had ended up on the lower branch. This time, the moonbeam no longer illuminated his leg, since it illuminated his face. My terror at that moment made me make an instinctive movement. My right foot positioned itself to run as fast as possible in the opposite direction, but I was paralyzed because his face was the most horrible thing I had ever seen. His two shining eyes were devoid of pupils and had wide cracks, thick and green, scattered across his face. His mouth was slightly open and his lower jaw seemed to split into two parts. His nose seemed to be roughly fused with the rest of his face, and his ears appeared to be partially torn off. His blue skin, like that of corpses, shone under the moonlight and revealed large patches of bark stuck in places on his skull and cheeks. It's as if he was a perfect blend between a tree and a human corpse. At the third crack, Ben disappeared into the tree behind him, the creature's arm wrapped around his torso. I screamed so loud that the echoes reverberated throughout the forest, and I tried to catch Ben's leg in a swift motion, but the creature was so quick that my best friend was already at the top of the tree, suddenly disappearing into the leaves. I continued to scream, but I was now the only thing in this forest making a sound. Ben didn't even have time to struggle before he completely disappeared in a flash. I tried to climb the tree in a last burst of courage, putting all my effort and will to the test. I had just managed to cling to the branch above. About 2 meters from the ground, another crack echoed, right under my feet. When I looked down, I saw the creature that was right below me. And in an instant, its arm reached out to grab my calf and pull me firmly towards it. I kicked out, and to this day, I'm still not sure if I hit it. I I fell to the ground as the creature raced down the tree at full speed to join me. Without waiting, I got up and ran as fast as possible to put as much distance as possible between the creature and me. I had no idea where I was going, but I kept running without stopping. My head was starting to spin from the effort, while behind me, I could hear the horrible noises of the creature jumping from tree to tree. And then, the worst thing that could happen to me at that moment happened. I took a tree full in the face as I was propelled at full speed. I was on my butt, attempting to gather my belongings. I was in order, and barely had I regained a semblance of my senses that I was up again, already ready to run again. But something stopped me. There was no tree trunk in front of me, because it wasn't a tree that I had hit. It was human legs. So I looked up and saw Ben right in front of me. He was hanging from a vine, his eyes red, completely bloodshot, his gaze full of terror. My legs were shaking so much. Today, I can't explain how I managed to get back on my feet. And barely had this feat been accomplished when Ben's body was pulled with a sharp tug, with a loud crack. As if someone with monstrous strength had just pulled on the alien, until he climbed up the entire tree. I saw his skull crack, hitting a sturdy branch just above him, and something fell at my feet, just before he disappeared entirely. Traumatized, I picked it up mechanically, without even realizing what I was doing, what I was holding in my hand. I could have recognized it among thousands, as its shape was so particular, because it was that damn branch that Ben had ripped off earlier. The moment I grabbed it, other cracks sounded all around me, and when I looked between the shadows of the trees, I noticed all these shining eyes that remained still. All were staring at me. I drew on my last strength to run as far away from this forest as possible, and I screamed for help. But no sound echoed. I heard macabre noises right behind me, and it was now impossible for me to turn around. Otherwise, they could have caught me. My legs tired. My heart was beating so hard that I felt like it was going to stop. I was running out of strength and was about to give up when I finally saw the wooden sign at the entrance of the forest. At that moment, my legs started to completely give out on me, and I threw myself in a final effort as far as possible. Passing the wooden sign by about a meter, I slipped and found myself rolling another meter, all while protecting my face. I was waiting for death to come. I was ready to be another victim of these horrible things. But then I noticed that nothing was chasing me anymore. The noises had stopped, and I could feel the warm summer air invading my nostrils. I had come out of the forest. I looked up at the trees and scrutinized each one of them. In the branches, there were at least 30 silhouettes. They were all looking at me, their eyes filled with tears. I screamed and insulted them with every name I knew at that moment. Then, finally, I threw the branch I was holding in their direction. I wanted that branch to violently hit one of their heads. But instead of that, a monstrously twisted arm came out from behind one of the branches of one of the trees in front of me, and firmly grabbed the branch in mid-flight with a crack. The next moment, all the trees started to move, and the silhouettes gradually disappeared into the darkness. After a few seconds, there was nothing left, as if everything had disappeared, as if none of this had ever existed. But just as I was about to turn around, I saw the monstrous face of one of these creatures. Right next to one of the holes on the edge of the forest, his face was stained with blood, strewn with several pieces of bark, deeply embedded in his flesh. He was smiling. But not with a friendly smile. It's as if he was inviting me to come back here, in this forest. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I realized with horror that this smile indeed belonged to someone I knew. Ben was just a shadow of his former self, and with one final smile, I saw his horribly disfigured face disappear into the forest mist.